Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson. And I'm incredibly excited to have on the show today Stephen Parker. So, welcome, Stephen, joining us all the way from Taiwan. Hello, how are you today?
Hi, Victoria. Fantastic. Glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, Stephen and I met a few months ago on LinkedIn. I think we were sort of came across each other, and I was absolutely fascinated by listening to his podcast, Leadership Matters. And I wanted to find out more about Stephen because he has the most fascinating background and combination of focus areas. And I thought this was a brilliant opportunity to have him on the show and share some of his brilliant expertise and experience with us here. So, Stephen, first of all, I understand that you have a really interesting blend of music, leadership coaching and training, presentation, consulting. How I'm really fascinated by this. Like, how did you get into all these different areas, and how do you combine them today?
For me, it was just one of the things. A few people have asked me this because I basically got to the age of around 53, and I think a lot of us, I think 53 is the new 35. You know, I know, because I woke up one day and I kind of thought, what is it that I want to do with the rest of my life? And I thought, what are the things that what am I passionate about? What do I love doing? And I thought about it. I couldn't find a way to kind of pick one. I couldn't think, well, I really love to do music. I love to play. I love all this kind of stuff. I really love communicating. I love helping people communicate, really, more and more. I mean, that's kind of a passion of mine, is helping other people to communicate better because, I've struggled with it myself over the years. Um, and then just thinking, well, and then, people would ask me to present, and I'm like, well, should I be a presenter? Should I be a trainer? Should I be a musician? And I have a bar as well. I mean, I have a bar which I have a whiskey tasting room because I'm very passionate about whiskey as well. I don't drink every day. I'm not, but I'm very passionate about the Scottish stories of my childhood. I come from Glaswegian parents, and they
Mm.
talked about whiskey all the time, and I'm very passionate about the history of my original country. I grew up in Australia, but I live in Taiwan now. I've lived here for 24 years. And so just having these passions just kind of drove me to try and think of a way that I could just live my life and follow each of my passions and do it at the same time. And that, in a nutshell, is what I've been trying to do.
Amazing. And I'm really curious because how do all those different threads feed into your leadership coaching? Because it must mean that you bring a very different and unique perspective to the leadership world.
So one of the brilliant things that I'm able to do is, I created an event at my own tasting space where we had leadership meeting, followed by communication training, followed by a little speech from me about innovation in whiskey. And then we had a tasting session afterwards where everybody kind of relaxed and kind of got to know each other. So, you know, eh, people think are a long way from each other, but actually there are ways to use everything that you are and bring it together. I'm also going to be doing some music salons, at my tasting space. I've also started to use music in the way I want to teach people how to communicate. Um,
Ooh, that sounds interesting. So tell me more about this.
so there are lots of tools now. I mean, if anyone who's into recording and stuff like that, it's actually very, very easy to get, what they call digital audio workstations and record stuff. You and I are using an online Zencaster program to be able to talk to each other 12,000 miles away from each other. There are tools now that can allow you to easily kind of create music in 5-10 minutes. Maybe it's not the best music in the world, but but you can create it fairly fairly quickly. And so I've just started recently to try and use some of this in my, what I found is there are people who have lots of different talents. And when you have people who struggle with communication, they struggle with presentation, I'm trying to find ways that I can allow them to be successful before they do the thing that they're afraid of most. So, somebody, especially in Taiwan, everybody grows up learning how to play piano. They learn how to play the violin. We're talking about cultural kind of cultural. I don't want to be culturally cliched here, but it is a very very common thing for Taiwanese to learn the piano, learn violin. They go to karaoke. They love to sing. There's all these kinds of things, and finding those talents for people where they can express themselves comfortably and then bring that into their presentation is something that I've been experimenting with recently. And so, for me, it's able to use the passions that I've got to bring those passions into the business field.
I love that. And I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Like that's a something that can enable people to relax, to enjoy themselves, to express themselves, and then to take that feeling into the communication. I think that's a really great idea because I suppose it's just another form of expression, right? It's another way of communicating.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've really focused on recently is what I call high sensitivity people.
Mm.
Um, and so I'm actually working with a group in Taiwan who they call themselves high sensitivity leaders. And I've been doing research on this, and I found that like a lot of CEOs, etc., about 47% of CEOs identify as actually being introverts. And so I've
Mm.
been specifically focusing on those people who are not afraid, but are less comfortable in those communicative situations. I spent 35 years training myself to be comfortable in front of people. But when I started, I hated it. It was
Mm.
terrible, but I loved music. I loved to perform, but I
Mm.
hated being in front of people. And taking those people from, you know, the presentation, what I believe, a presentation or a communication or talking in front of people should be a joy because you should know what you're talking about. You should love what you're talking about. And the process shouldn't get in the way of you being able to deliver a great message. And that's kind of one of the things that I really focus on.
Excellent. And that was fascinating to me that 47% of CEOs are introverts or identify themselves as introverts because it's not I suppose, the stereotype of that we think of. We think of as a CEO should be, loud, extrovert, be able to communicate, with everybody and have that confidence no matter what. So this is quite interesting. Do you think this is a recent trend that people are acknowledging this? Because I'm assuming that this isn't new, that suddenly people are CEOs are introverts. That must have been true in the past. But do you think people somehow try to hide this or try to avoid talking about this?
I think we live in a world now where it's okay to be weak. It's okay to be soft. It's okay to express yourself. I think, if I think about how my parents and my grandparents kind of communicated, you never got to see any weakness. I don't remember my father ever coming home and saying I had a really bad day, or, he came home, he did what he had to do and he continued on doing it. And I think we're in a world now where, yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I think that, the world has allowed us to be softer maybe now, and it's allowed us to say, well, actually, I've been doing this for X number of years, but, actually I haven't really enjoyed it, or it's been we're allowed to express the weakness. We're allowed to be authentic. And I think this is a wonderful time to be alive because we are
Excellent.
allowed to be authentic.
I think that's really true, actually, and I think it's much more of a space. Even I think this has only really been sort of in the last few years, right? That people have had that sense of wanting or being able to own much more of who they are. So I'm really curious, coming back to introverted or leaders or highly sensitive leaders, what's the kind of advice that you give them, or what kind of strategies do you help them with just to kind of move them forwards and help them get that communication style that they're aiming for?
A lot of stuff that I work on with people is really about where you put your focus. Right? I find, and it's almost like acting training, almost, but it's about thinking about, and this is a real eye opener for most people who are in this kind of highly sensitive, introverted area. When I start talking about things like, you know, focus on, and it sounds like it should be easy, but it's not. Focus on what it is that you want the other person to get from the interaction. Don't focus on your fear of the interaction, because your fear of the interaction will get in the way of you communicating. Ask yourself the question, do I know what I'm talking about? Have I prepared? Do I have the information? Am I in charge of my domain? Am I really ready to be here? And if the answer is yes, then the communication shouldn't be a problem for you.
Mm.
But the communication itself, the process, the fear gets in the way. And when you have that fear, it's really hard to get your message across because you're thinking about everybody looking at you. You're focused on that aspect of communication. Years ago, I remember reading something that, people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death, which I thought was an incredible thing. But my research anecdotally, over the last few years of doing what I've been doing, has really shown me that this is true. People are really afraid. That's a very harsh way of putting it, but it's a stressful environment for people to be in.
Mm,
Meetings, communications, presentations, online, especially
mm,
when you add what you do and what I do, where you add this cross-cultural element to it, where it's, you know, do you know the person that you're talking to? You could be talking to someone in the UK, as you and I have had separate conversations about this, but the person in the UK is informed by their UK culture, but also all of the things that go into making them a person.
mm.
They're not just a British person. They're also, as you said, they're a woman, they're a man, they're an age, they're a history, they're a location. There's all sorts of things that go into making someone who they are. And when you add this stress of presentation or meeting on top of not understanding how other people communicate culturally, it's super, super stressful. And I'm trying to take
Yeah.
that stress away.
That's fantastic. And I can imagine that's incredibly valuable for the people that you're working with to help them move through some of those fears or nerves or whatever they're feeling so that they are able to be, I suppose, more of themselves. And I was quite kind of interested. You mentioned, you talked about them being authentic, being more of their authentic selves. And I'm quite interested in this word because I hear it a lot, and people talk about, you must be authentic, particularly as a leader today. But I think it sometimes can be a bit overused or perhaps even a bit of a cliche. So I'm interested, like, what does it mean to you when people say like be authentic, or when you're talking about to your the people that you would support, what does that mean, be authentic?
I think for me, authentic is maybe owning up to the things that you are in control of and maybe not in control of. Authentic to me is actually like if I go into a meeting and I am unprepared for that meeting, or I don't really know what's going on, or I don't know why I'm there, I'm okay with saying, hey guys, I'm not really on top of this. One of you has called this meeting. You need to help me to catch me up on where we are or something, because I'm not in a position to be able to understand this. Um, you know, I always think authentic is one of those things that we need to be authentic, but we can't be too authentic. We need to be honest, but we can't be too honest. You have to have a certain veneer. People expect you to be able to achieve certain things, and
Mm,
choosing when to be authentic and when to kind of like just go, well, now's my moment to just maybe just be quiet. I don't have to be so authentic and so honest about everything. I don't have to tell them what I had for breakfast this morning. I don't need to tell them that I woke up this morning feeling like I've got a pain in my left knee. Is it relevant to the meeting? Is it going to affect the outcomes of the meeting? If it is, then I think you need to be honest and authentic about what you're going through. If you are suffering on a day, if you have come from home and your parents have suddenly taken ill or something like that, I think these things that are going to affect the communication. I think they're okay to share and talk about and be authentic about. But coming
mm.
back to the real meaning of authentic, I think is if you are a strong, passionate person who's an extrovert, well, use that. Use that as your leadership style. If you're an introvert, use that as your leadership style. You don't have to pretend to be the CEO that you saw in the magazine or on TV or whatever it is. I think authentic is actually just understanding yourself, knowing how you respond to things, and using that as your most powerful tool. Quiet can work, loud can work. Be you and use your tools to be successful.
I love that. So, everything works, being authentic to yourself, whether it's being loud or quiet. And I think that's brilliant because there is that permission to be that, right? Even if the role models haven't been that there in the past. But I have sort of follow up question to that, which is, let's imagine you're working with a leader who is um, more introverted or highly sensitive, but actually the majority of their team are extrovert and they're dealing with very different style to them. Do you have any sort of thoughts about how a leader can lead well in that situation?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things to do as a leader is to be the introverted leader leading a group of people who are extremely powerful. There are a bunch, I mean, maybe a sales team is a good example of this, where you have an introverted sales manager who doesn't need to be super outgoing. But just because you're not outgoing doesn't mean that you cannot ask the right questions. It doesn't mean that you can't focus people on the activities that they need to do. It doesn't mean you can't, you know, Mike Weinberg, who's a sales guru, and I've interviewed him on this show. Um, he talks about this, having the sales conversation with people. Just because you're not outgoing doesn't mean you can't ask for clarity. You can't ask for truth. You can't ask for the right answers. You can use your strength, which maybe is the opposite of them, and, if people are going to be all kind of like, maybe your job as the introverted leader, say, guys, okay, here's what I need from you right now. Doesn't mean you have to be afraid of people, but you can use your quiet strength to just bring them back down and say, okay, now we're going to talk about what I need to talk about. I've got three things I'm going to ask you today. Okay. You know, I mean, my mother was an introvert, but she never had a problem controlling all of us as kids running around the house, right? She had that
Yeah.
quiet power, when she stopped.
Mm.
And I think a lot of this authenticity comes from using. If you're an introvert, use your quiet power. Stand up in front of a group of 50 people quietly and silently, and see what happens. Right?
Mm.
They come to you eventually, and then you're allowed to deliver your message.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see there's real power in that. And I think just because it's different doesn't mean it can't work. And I think that's really interesting. And I think when it comes to the team, actually, there's something you said there about strengths. I think it sounds like it's about appreciating each other's strengths, right? That appreciating that everybody is different. And that everybody brings something different to the team. And that is where the power of the team is.
Absolutely. And I think as a leader, your job, and this is something that you do very, very well in what you do, your training and facilitation, you need as a leader to understand every single individual in your team,
Mm.
understand their strengths, what they're good at. You know, if you've got the extrovert who can lead people, and that's not always the manager of that group, right? The leader is not always the leader. You know what I mean? Um, finding the people who actually have that strength, finding the people who can, some people are great at getting on the phone and just calling everybody and they don't really mind that they get rejected 1,000 times. If you've got that person in your team, use them, get them doing that kind of stuff. You might have somebody, in fact, I've just literally had the situation today where I have let somebody go from my team because they were in the wrong job. It wasn't the job for them. They had strengths. We talked about their strengths. We went through their strengths, but their strengths weren't what was required currently in our organization. And so, I'm helping them to find work in another organization that will be better for them. And I think this is part about being a leader is you've got to understand. And again, this comes back to what you do, this cultural communication, understanding your people so that you can help them to be better versions of themselves. Here are your strengths. Here are some things you could work on. Some people talk about, focusing on your weaknesses and making them stronger. I'm a big believer that if somebody's got strengths, double down. You know, if you're the fastest runner in the world, then go to the Olympics and be a 100-meter runner. Don't play lacrosse because you don't know how to play lacrosse, right? Focus on your strengths, make them as amazing as you can, but be aware of where you have weaknesses and bring people into your teams, you know. But always, I think this, being aware of your personal weaknesses, surrounding yourself with people who have those abilities, and rewarding and valuing people who have different abilities to you. We often look at other people and think they are, if somebody is different to us or they express themselves differently, we sometimes will judge them for that and say they don't communicate like I do. I don't like them. I don't trust them. But you've got to look for people who have strengths that you don't have and be able to use those strengths to the advantage of you, your organization, or whatever institution that you're working for.
Yeah, lots of that resonates with me. I was nodding as you were speaking because actually it's really true. We often in team situations, there's a real focus on what are your development areas? What are you going to be working on to address those weaknesses? But actually, your strengths are your strengths. And in fact, you can build a team of amazing people as a leader if you are able to have the diversity. That really means that there's a diversity of thought or opinion, of perspective. And I think that's where the richness comes, right? The creativity, the innovation, when you do have those perspectives. But at the same time, I suppose the question that's on my mind is, when you have people who are very, very different from each other, sometimes that can be more challenging, right? Because people then have may not be able to understand each other so well as if they are similar to each other. So, how do you encourage leaders or encourage teams to work well together when they are very different from each other?
This is one of the biggest questions I think at the moment, because we live in a world which is very focused on diversity and inclusion, which I totally believe in. The problem with that for a lot of people is that if you have a very diverse and very inclusive organization, then you're culturally potentially in conflict. I remember way back in the day when we had an exchange student from Indonesia staying in our family when I was a little boy. And in Indonesia, they would run the tap and wash the dishes under the tap. That was kind of the way they did it. My mother grew up in Scotland where they didn't have water. She grew up in ration times in the Second World War, you know. And so for her, that was like, oh my God, you're wasting water. Plus, we're in Australia where we had droughts, you know. And so I remember her actually getting angry until we realized that this was just something that they did, you know, where they were and weren't aware of how we did things here. Um, I'm talking about that because that was a learning opportunity for us. And I think with diversity in a workforce, and we're talking really about workforces here, diversity in a workforce, you need to have people like you or people who can help an organization to understand the differences. Spend some time getting to know people. Don't misunderstand people. The number of times I've heard people who are somehow inherently racist, but then you say, well, what about so and so? They are from that race that you're talking about. They go, oh, that's different. That's different. And the only difference is because they know them.
Mm.
And I think this is something that, once you know people, and that's where I think people like us come in an organization. We help an organization to get to know. We set up situations, we set up facilitation, we set up coaching to allow people in a safe space to get to know the people around them. Sometimes it's one-on-one. They bring problems, and they say, well, maybe have you thought about that? That's where they're coming from, and that's just something that they are used to doing in a certain way. How can you help them to understand that you need it done differently, or you would like it done differently? Or does it need to be done differently?
Mm.
Sometimes people come to you with that, oh, they don't, it's got to be done like this. Does it? I always
Mm.
ask the question about everything, when someone says, oh, it should be done like this. We've always done it like this. Well, but do you have to do it like this? Many roads lead to Rome and all that kind of stuff. What are your
Mm.
outcomes? And that's why I think like for an organization now, it's a wonderful world that we live in now, really, because an organization can be focused on outcomes and less on process. And I think going back, I think a lot of organizations were focused as much on the process as they were on the outcome. And if we can free ourselves up to look at what the outcomes are, then the process of how we do that doesn't really matter within reason.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. And actually, you also these different styles of leadership have changed, right? So whether it's more directive or supportive or coaching, those are different styles that people have and are able to then really tap into, particularly in a world where it's not expected the leader is going to give all the steps to kind of then achieve the goal. I'm really interested. I mean, you're working with many leaders in your coaching and training, and I know that you're doing fantastic work supporting leaders become even better leaders. So I'm really interested in what's coming up next. What do you see as the big worries or concerns on the minds of leaders right now?
Some of the things that leaders are going through right now are really about, they're confused about, some of them are confused about this whole kind of hybrid work process that's happened. Some leaders are confused about whether they can trust their employees or not if they're not being able to see them. I see a lot of not mistrust, but I see a lot of confusion. You know, I see a lot of leaders now, and this maybe comes back to being authentic about whether you have fears of things. What I see now are leaders following the zeitgeist. They're following the paradigm. And so they are, especially I think in large multinational corporations, they're being told that they need to think a certain way. They're being told that they need to be aware of diversity, they need to be aware of equity, they need to be aware of inclusion. They're being told that they need to build hybrid environments. They're being told that they need to move online. They're being told to do all of these things. And a lot of leaders, I think, spend much of their time expressing to staff opinions that they may not necessarily hold themselves. And I see that as to me, this is a kind of a red flag for future leadership. I think there's going to be a lot of stress coming out through leaders having to do things without the support, proper support, again, of people like you, of people like me, the proper support of people actually able to take them through the difficulties and the concerns that they have with some of these processes. Just because there's a policy, a company has a policy that says we must be, 50% women by a certain stage, or we must have X number of minority groups in our organization. The leaders carrying these things out, but in their DNA, are they believing it? And do they understand why they're doing it and the reasons that it's necessary and all these kind of things? And I think we have a duty as organizations and as leaders of other leaders to help people understand the whys of what we do. Simon Sinek always talks about that. You find the why and you can find everything else. And I think that is really the essential question for everything. And the biggest flag I have going forward is that I think a lot of leaders are not necessarily aware in their DNA of the why of what they're doing.
Right. I think that's so powerful because motivation is everything. If you haven't got the motivation, then nothing else can follow. It's really
Right.
difficult to make things happen if you haven't got the true understanding of you say, why are you doing this? And I'm quite, you mentioned hybrid there. I mean, that's really a hot potato, a hot topic, because obviously there is huge amounts of debate even today, even after 4 years, like what's the right balance? What's the right way to have the team? So, should it be, hybrid? How many days in the workplace or not? Are people allowed to be flexible on that or not? Are they allowed to be flexible on their hours or not? And I'm seeing here in the UK really very different responses to that. And some of that's dependent on the industry, some of that is dependent on, I suppose, the organizational culture as well. But I'm really kind of curious to get your perspective on this, particularly as you're based in a very different region of the world. How are you seeing this at the moment, this idea, whole debate around hybrid, remote, and what is the best way going forward for teams?
So I think the interesting thing about hybrid, this comes back to one of the issues with hybrid for me is cultural understanding as well. Um, you know, one of the things that we found here in Taiwan was, especially perhaps with some of the younger staff, is that they are, maybe they're still living at home.
Mhm.
Houses are probably a quarter of the size they are in the UK, and that's not about it's not about wealth. It's simply about space. Um, and so, we have to understand that actually for some of our staff here, hybrid is not an advantage. It's actually a disadvantage because they're where are they going to work? They might be sharing a bedroom with one or two other people. Um, or in the past, they may have gone to the McDonald's down the road to do their homework because there was no space at home. Um, so we have to understand the kind of the cultural specific situation for hybrid. Again, there can be no one rule that says, well, you almost work from home 3 days a week. Having options, I think, is great. I think it's wonderful. Allowing people to manage their own time, allowing people to be, and I think my understanding of work now, I think that people in the workforce now are much more interested in being able to manage their own processes. They're less interested in being told what to do. Um, that I mean, I'm saying that, but I think it's true. Um, and hybrid is something that really kind of comes up when you're talking about kind of people managing their own processes. Some of the people I've had work for me don't want to work from home. They want to be in the office, right? We have to allow that if that's a situation, but we can't disadvantage those who are choosing to spend time out of the office if we have created a policy, where we're allowed to work from home or on the road or somewhere else, you know. So I think this is going to be one of the biggest questions for the next 10, 20 years. You know, the pandemic opened up this opportunity for the world to actually get to a point, where we could trust and empower people to work from anywhere. The technology has arrived where we can work from anywhere. You're running courses online. I'm doing a lot of my facilitation and coaching online. You and I are doing a podcast online. We're 12,000 miles apart. is there a reason for me to go into my office and do what I do there? Or could I do it on my laptop at home? The answer is I could do it on my laptop at home. Um,
Mm.
so finding that connection, right? I think if you realize that you're missing a connection with your staff somehow, then you've got to build those seasons into it. Um, and I think it's coming back to almost it's like kind of catching up with families. You know, if you you know I before my mother passed away, I had a kind of a weekly routine of phone calls, and then eventually it was kind of online message, online kind of face to face. And if you don't have those kind of set times where you catch up with people, because as you said, I think you don't have those water cooler conversations. You don't have those walking around the office with a coffee cup conversations. It's just you don't have water bottles sitting in the way of your recordings. Yeah.
Absolutely. And by the way, sort of my condolences about your mother. And
Well,
but thank you for
sometime now,
sharing.
sometime. Hmm.
But thank you for sharing that. And I think that's a really good thought, that with family, equally, sometimes we need that face to face time. With teams, sometimes we need that face to face time. And I kind of interested because obviously this has an impact. So in the UK, the dynamic is actually people sometimes are reluctant to go into the office. They don't see the reason to. There is not the motivation, as we were talking about earlier, to come into the office. And there are real concerns here about disengagement, team fragmentation. But particularly, what I've noticed here is this debate about, well, how do recent graduates learn the job? How do they learn to interact professionally and
Hmm.
communicate if they're not in environments when they see other people doing it? So, is that something you're seeing yourself? I mean, is this a conversation you're having with leaders at the moment?
Yeah, I think this idea of kind of, if you want someone to work in your space, then often the best way is then to shadow someone that you think is doing a good job, right? It's very, very clear in retail. I mean, retail or in kind of the service industry, right? You need to be there. You need to do the actual job. It's a physical kind of in the moment job. But other things, I mean, if you're learning how to do a job and you're unable to kind of just ask someone next to you about a silly question you might have, then you're just going to continue doing it the way you thought it should be done, right? And then how do you handle those moments of teaching or those moments for where training is required to help somebody to learn more about it? I think it's going to be a big issue for some organizations. And I think
Mm,
the way we learn when we're kids, right, is we watch our parents, we watch our siblings, then we see our teachers, we see kids at school, we see all those things, and we learn behaviors, good and bad, right, from all
mm,
of those people. And if we're not able to have an environment where we can model ourselves or decide that we don't want to be like the people around us, then it's harder for us to learn, I think. So I think it's a scary good point that you're making here. That's
mm,
people should genuinely be afraid of. But I think this
mm.
comes back to leaders. If I can just continue on this, I think leaders need to be aware and create environments and situations where people can come together naturally and effectively. This is the hardest job I think for leadership now, is to build these environments where people can spend time communicating, modeling, and learning. Doesn't mean, in the old days, 5 years ago, right? You know, you just kind of, everybody was in the office together at some point, but even with sales teams, and I spend a lot of time managing sales teams, sales teams would be away the whole week, but you'd have a sales meeting on Monday morning and everybody would get together and then maybe have a lunch together. Or you have an afternoon meeting and maybe have a dinner together, you know. So I think creating those sort of opportunities for people to get together and learn and share, and without necessarily the leader being there all the time as well. I mean, people need the moments to learn from each other about, especially the foibles of right? Leaders have foibles, right? The team will be, when Steve says that, what he really means is, people are going to communicate about those sorts of things as well. So I think creating an environment, creating activities, creating moments where people can get together is a super important skill, I think, for future leaders.
I really like that. And that resonates with me, that whole idea of intentionally creating the time and space and the moments to bring the team together, even if they're not together all of the time. I've got one last question, which is, related to this. There's also lots of debate currently here in the UK about flexible working. For example, there was a big experiment done with the 4-day week across a number of different organizations. And this idea that the 5-day week is now outdated and it was invented 100 years ago. And actually, we need a new model. What are your views on this idea of flexible working through hours? So, should we be stipulating and going to a 4-day week, or do you think there are other ways for us to think about this?
I have a reasonably unpopular view of work. I think um, I don't personally believe in what might be considered to be a work-life balance approach. What I believe in is the ability to choose to spend the time on the things that you want to do. Now, I'm in a different position in my life, right? I think as you get into kind of your 50s and maybe you have your own businesses and stuff like that, you are slightly more free to make choices about when you do things. I think for you know um, this kind of work life. I remember I met up with a senior leader, and I talk to leaders. I mean, a lot of what I do is about leadership. So, I met a senior leader of one of the world's largest multinationals, and he was asked about work-life balance, and he said, I get paid a fairly decent wage, and when my board calls me if they call me at 2 or 3 in the morning with an emergency, I have to answer the phone. It's as simple as that. He said, but he said, I've chosen that life,
Mm.
right? And I think for me that's what work-life balance is finding a way that you are happy to go through. And it means actually interacting with every moment of your life to say, I choose to be here. I choose to be in this moment. I choose to be doing what I'm doing right now. And that to me is this kind of work-life balance. It's okay to work a couple of extra hours. It doesn't mean you have to, well, it's 5 o'clock and I've got to go home now. I think it's okay to work a little bit more if you want to. If you want to get something done, you're feeling passionate about it, or you really just want to get it done because it'll help you tomorrow if you can get it done today, you know, but interact with that, be aware of it, understand it, and make choices about it. And to me, that's where you get empowerment. You get strength by choosing that you are going to do these things and choosing when you're not going to do them. You know, someone asks you to do thing and say, no, I have promised my partner, mother, lover, friend, whoever it is, that I will do this now. And that's important to me. And I need to make this clear. And I'm choosing right now to do that. You need to understand that this is what I'm choosing right now. But another time I will choose you and choose the work because that's also important to me. But right now I need to choose this as a priority. I hope you can understand. But I will get all of my work done. It'll be done by the schedules that we agreed on, all those kinds of things.
I love that. I think that was so powerful what you said. I choose to be here. I choose to be in this moment. I choose to do this. And I think that is, a brilliant end to this conversation. So thank you so much, Stephen. I really appreciate your time. Now, if people want to connect with you, find out more about your leadership coaching and training that you do, what is the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So LinkedIn is very easy. I mean, if they find Stephen Parker on LinkedIn, I've got a page, Leadership Matters page on LinkedIn. They can go and find me there, and then just send me a message, send me a note. I'll always,
Excellent. And
uh, I'll always reach out. I'll always respond.
amazing. Well, we'll put the links in the show notes. And I also highly recommend your podcast, which I've been listening to, Leadership Matters. So again, we'll put some links in the show notes to that. But Stephen, thank you so much for joining me here today, particularly as I know it's my morning and it's now your late afternoon, early evening. So thank you so much for making the time. And thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast.
I've had a great time, and I've learned as much as I feel I've shared. So thank you very much for your time as well, Victoria.
No problem. See you soon.